Welcome back. What is up, beautiful people? So, in this episode of the Lifting Life podcast, we're going to do something a little bit different. Now, I've no idea how this is going to play out, but I'm going to give it a good go. This is also going to be up on YouTube. I'm going to do the best I can to talk through the whole process. But what we're doing this time around is I'm going to be writing a program from scratch. Now, if you follow me on Instagram, if you don't, I have literally no idea how you ended up here. But I posted something to offer the opportunity for a free program for any person. Now, obviously, this is going to be powerlifting tailored. Excuse me. And what we're going to be trying to do is take an example of the person who got through first. There were multiple people, and I appreciate everyone. I think we got about 15 different applications. I apologize that it was only the first one, but this person who put their name forward to get this program, and they're kind of the perfect person to work with for this. So I'll talk through what information we've got about this person, and then we're going to build the program just on here. I think could be quite a helpful resource for people. And I'm going to literally type everything out, and then I'm going to send it over to them for free because, generous kind of guy. But hopefully this gives you an indication of the decision making that goes behind making a program. It should be an insight to, with certain information, how we can make decisions, how we can best choose exercises, sets, rep ranges, days per week, quite literally everything around it. Now, there's some bits of information that are going to be restrictive to what we can and can't do. And so that will be a little bit more subjective to this individual. But hopefully, overall, this is still something you can take away from. And that's probably enough initial chat. So you also have to excuse that I'm going to be drinking coffee through this to get through. Where are we at? Now, I'm not going to give you the name of the person. If you're watching this on YouTube, you might be able to see it on my screen. I apologize if you can. I don't think you can. Now, obviously the first things we want to work through is the goals of the individual. Now, with everyone who comes through this, they're probably going to have very similar goals. But this person specified strength progression, confidence in lifting heavy, and an improvement in technique. Now, I've got videos from this person as well, which I'm going to go through and talk about what I see and why I'm going to make decisions around it. Now, the training experience is what 1 year training experience. We haven't specified if that's within powerlifting, but there's other information here that suggests to me probably not. But we'll call it 1 year training experience, probably within SBD sort of work. Now we have maxes and then movement styles. So we have an 82.5 kilo max squat, and that's high bar. We have a 45 kilo bench, and I offer the specifics of grip style, so where exactly we hold the bar. They say not sure. And then current max deadlift is 115 kilos, but conventional. Now, immediately there should be some information here. We know that this is based on, I know this person a little bit, but we know this isn't someone highly trained. This is a relative beginner. So we know that the basics are going to be assumed within both movement, falling within a bell curve of mistakes they might be making, and things that they've not tried. So for instance, we'll find 9 times out of 10 within the world of powerlifting that someone is going to be stronger with a low bar squat. We know that if someone's pulling conventional, they've probably not tried too many things. That doesn't mean we're going to look to change them immediately, but that does mean there's a suggestion there of something we could play with. Now, they've also highlighted there's no injuries, which is good because it means there's nothing we have to play with specific to that individual. They've highlighted 3 days per week. So, excuse me, the first thing I'm going to do is go onto the template of program, which is just like an open layout of days per week and then spaces for exercises and so on. I'm just going to clear it straight down to 3 days. Now, the reason I'm going to do that is because, as far as I'm concerned, that is a restriction. I'm not going to force more days on someone who has clearly got a lot of programming space to make progress already. So 3 days per week. They currently do roughly, as they say, twice of each of these movements. Now, obviously, we know that they are priority. Having the frequency of 2 times squat is pretty reasonable. 2 times deadlift is pretty good. And 2 times bench is probably a little less than we want. And we know that within 3 days working, we have a capacity as to what we could do with any of these anyway. Now, not really sure of their weaknesses or sticking points. So we're getting the vibe of this being a relatively new lifter. So what I'm going to do just straight away is put onto the program around the frequency of, we're looking at 2 times squat, and I'm just going to put them on here. We'll pick the placement specifically as we go. And 2 times bench, I'm just going to throw these on here as well. And we're going 2 times deadlift. And once more, I will just throw these on here. Now, what we have to decide is what the frequency is going to be for this lifter, what gets them through sessions that isn't a time commitment that gets ridiculous. So without being given that information, I'm going to make the assumption of 1 hour to 1.5 hours. Good, for one session. Now, obviously, that's very short, but this is a start point. Anytime we write a program from the beginning, we're going to start minimalist. What's the least we could do to find progress? There is literally no benefit. I've just realized I've done all of this on a template program that I needed to save as an additional one. We're going to figure this out as we go. All right, people, it's the first time I've done this. So make a copy, and we're going to put this under initials just because no one needs to know the name of this person. And again, cutting this down to 3 days a week and then throwing in those movements. So nice and quickly. Goodbye day 4 and 5. I leave these as an option. Very rarely will I mean, almost never would I program someone on 6 days a week. We're just not allowing for enough recovery time. So let's make the assumptions of 2 times squat, beginning, end of the week, 2 times bench, we'll go second and third day of the week, and 2 times deadlift, we'll go day 2 and day 3 again. Now, obviously, that's quite compact. We don't know the days of the week they're training. They've not given us information. So we're going to make the assumption of spacing these out a little bit. In an ideal world, if we're doing only 3 days a week, they are day on, day off, day on, day off, just to allow within that limited amount of days, enough recovery each time so that we can do a little bit more in each session. So now we've got that as the basic information they've given us for the movements themselves. Let's just add those maxes in. So 82.5 squat, 45 on the bench. Nice and easy. 82.5, 45, and 115. And we're going to write in the fact that it was conventional just because that's obviously going to dictate a lot of our movement choices, and a high bar squat. And then bench, we're just unsure of grip. Cool. That's all I needed from the form. Now, the next thing is going to be looking over the stuff they have sent me, their videos on WhatsApp, which is going to be quite helpful. Now, again, if you're watching this on YouTube, maybe you'll get a glimpse of some of this stuff. I'm not going to show you too much because we'll talk you through it. So if I can just find where these were, here we go. What we're going to be looking at is not just obviously we're looking at the movements that they're showing us, but we're also going to get a better idea of where the breakdowns are. And so what would make sense for rep ranges, what would make sense for initial variations, because obviously the first thing we want to reinforce is just good movement. And one of the things is improving their technicalities. So there is no point throwing on as much as possible, throwing on a huge amount of volume, when realistically we have a baseline we need to work on. I might do some of these on my phone just to make life a little bit easier. So starting with the squat work, what do we have? You'll have to excuse me 1 second while I just find the videos that I'm going through. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to look at first. No, that's a, you'll have to excuse me. That was a bench video. So do we have some squat work? We do. Okay, so the squats straight away now, regular hand position, nothing obscene, and a normal setup under the bar. So I'm going to assume a relative level of training experience to have done this, except for looking around the gym quite a lot, but we know that's not a technical issue. Setup and stance is relatively narrow with this high bar position. Eyes down towards the floor, relatively quick squat, and just a little bit of knee valgus, which is just that shift in of the knee, nothing too substantial. Now, there's not huge amounts to take away from that. The execution's relatively good. We're just a little bit off on pacing. We have a second video here with the same sort of setup. And again, playing through this, very similar. So out of the bottom position, just a little bit of difficulty maintaining a knee position. Actually, that gets a fairly large amount more as we get into additional reps. So difficulty under load. Now, my first thoughts here are just our focus, because the bracing is pretty good. We're not losing a back position. It's just how we're going to work around the knee position, control out of that bottom position. Like I say, on the way down, we're pretty spot on. So my first thought working with this lifter, we don't have information about what they've been responsive to in the past. So I'm going to make as this a literal fresh cut, as if we've never seen this person before. We are going to start with, where are we here? Squats, and we're going to stick to high bar, but we're going to introduce, now we have the choice here. We have tempo squats or we have pause squats. Now, as I said, the eccentric itself and the bottom position we're attaining is absolutely fine. There is nothing wrong there. And so we're more looking at our ability to maintain that as we come out of the bottom position. So I lean towards a pause squat. Now, that's initially what I've put at the beginning of the week. Now, for the second session, again, leaning into the logic of it, if we're having difficulty staying very upright, that knee is coming very far forward, we are immediately losing control of it, I'm going to lean towards the option of introducing a low bar squat. And so that's what I'm going to do. We're going to have low bar to test. Now, we haven't picked any sets or reps or anything just yet because we're going to do this same thing for bench and for deadlifts. Now, let's go with deadlifts. Okay, so deadlift conventional position, we're a top-down setup at the moment, which just means holding the bar before our feet are in position, setting the top of our body and then the bottom. Not something I tend to lean towards. Okay, so getting into position, hips are starting just a tiny bit too low, which is a little bit off, and we're pulling a bit touch and go. So we're kind of trying to escape that issue. Hips are moving higher to where they should be. So my first thought is we need to teach this person about their start position. Immediately, something like a pause deadlift is coming to mind. Touch and go we want to kind of eradicate because we're just getting past that initial point, which is where the problem is coming from. Looking at the second video, we've got a roll away. Again, that start position is off from what we know she's going to drift into. Yeah, we drift immediately into it. But again, touch and go. And so the first rep, we're kind of escaping it. Now, we don't want to jump straight. This is someone who's been doing touch and go work. So to jump straight into just dead stop work is a substantial change. Now, this is something you'll see in my programming a fair bit. But what we're going to look at here, so we've got these 2 deadlift days. And I'm just going to put deadlift, paused, off floor. Now that just means pausing as close to the floor as possible to try to reinforce that start position. Now the reason for this is the feedback loop. We're picking variations that are going to highlight the issue in the training as quickly as possible and then allow us to feel the difference and correct them ourselves. This isn't something that's going to be coached. The movement itself is going to teach us, and hopefully that's going to give us the benefit. So we have this paused day. Now with that secondary day, we still want to be doing some deadlifting, but from what I can see here, our deadlift has all been touch and go, which is going to be the restriction in where we're growing. So we're going to introduce Cohen deadlifts. This is the middle ground, and this is something that I quite like for a lot of lifters for multiple reasons. Now, a Cohen deadlift is between between touch and go and dead stop. What it is it allows that bar to settle on the floor for a short period of time, but you keep tension. Now, the benefit here is we're not resetting over and over again, so we're not going to lose control through our pelvis and rib position. We're not going to have breakdown there so much. It avoids the risk of resetting and losing position and stressing our lower back where we're still learning. It also allows us to achieve a relative amount of volume if we're shifting through a phase like this. We don't want to drop off huge amounts of volume because that's what's been beneficial for us so far. So we have the movement selection of the Cohen style deadlift and the pause deadlift. And we have our high bar squats and we have our low bar squats. Let me just make sure I add in the word squats to low bar. Cool. Now we have our context. Now, bench, we're going to do the exact same thing. So watching bench on setup here, we have this time, so top down setup, which is good. I prefer this for bench, just means shoulders are set first. Next, we're going to our feet. Now, if you're listening to this, the mystery person who's taken this on, I would fully recommend putting your bum down before your feet. This means it becomes a fixed point because we're kind of guessing where the feet should go, and we're getting some looseness through the hip so that when we apply leg drive, they're shifting a bit. Okay, so grip. Grip is very narrow. I'm going to suggest that we move that grip out just a touch because when we get into that bottom position, you're really struggling to maintain your shoulders. But let's focus more. Callum will drift off into coaching mindset. Focus more on what it is we should be working on in terms of movement. So again, watching the next video that I've been sent, same grip, brings down at a reasonable pace. Again, it's touch and go, so we're hitting the chest and we're losing control right at that bottom portion. My mind is thinking about how we teach that deceleration of the bar rather than the acceleration of the bar. The first 2/3 are good, and then we're into touch and go work again. Okay, this one's a little bit better. We're not losing control in that bottom position. The setup itself is probably our biggest limitation. So we have that's the first thing that I am making a change. Now, we've been given 2 bench days, but I'm going to introduce 3. Now, this does not mean we're looking for 3 high intensity days. This just means that we're looking for 3 opportunities to do bench work as a whole and reinforce a movement pattern. So what do we have that's obvious? Now, the obvious thing straight away is that we're not doing any paused work. We're talking about getting specifically better at our sport. And so that's going to be priority. So this first bench day, we're just going to talk about a paused 1 count bench. Simple. Nothing too controversial from that. Now, the next one is about that deceleration and control. So what we're looking for is a movement that allows us to slow the bar, but we're introducing additional bench work, so it can't be overly taxing. Now, this is where, again, this might be my own biases, but a perspective that I'm taking quite quickly is something that's shorter in range, because if we're going to repeatedly get into that end range of motion where we're quite loose and we have problems, we're going to reinforce injury risk, and we're going to probably irritate a shoulder quite early on. So I pick something like a Spoto bench. Now, you could here pick something like a 2-count pause bench and keep it, a single count pause bench again, but you're having repetition without a change, or you could go with your tempo bench. Now, again, the reason I'm not choosing that is because we're going to extend the amount of time that we're in that bottom position, which just with this frequency of bench work is something I would be almost concerned about. So Spoto, simple. Spoto bench, if you're not sure what that means, is it's about an inch off the chest, paused, and then you press away. We don't extend the range, but we're teaching ourselves to stop the bar and decelerate that bar, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to maintain the same paused position. So that's 2. Now, the third one, we already have a relatively close grip. So there's no point introducing something like a close grip bench, because we're just going to exacerbate issues around the shoulder control at the bottom. Watching this one more time, the only thing that we have, 1 second, is that slight lack of control and about the deceleration and control in that bottom position. So this is where something like a tempo bench does become an option. So if I were to give you tempo bench, now what do we need to consider? We need to consider the fact that, again, it's extended range, it's extended amount of time under tension, but also what were we doing in the past? We were doing touch and go work. So we've not done a lot of paused work. We've got 2 movements that are already allowing for that. And extended time is probably going to be an issue. So now we can make a choice. We can do one of 2 things. We can have 2 types of tempo bench in a session, or we can have a specific, easier tempo bench. Now, what that means is something like a 3-1-0 count being difficult and a 3-0-0 count being easier. Now, these are protocols I've used in the past, and I'm kind of leaning into one of those ideas. But what I mean is 3 count on the way down and a 1 count pause and a press is substantial change from what we've done. A 3-0-0 count is a little bit closer to that touch and go, but it reinforces a single cadence through the entire eccentric portion. So I'm going to leave them both on there, and I'll make decisions as we go. Because with those movement selections, we've now picked all of our variations to start with, or all of our movement choices, at least with what we've taken on as assumptions so far. We do now have to consider, when I get onto this again, where did I put this? Okay, now we need to look at the specifics of the program we had beforehand. Now, I did look at this before, which is where some of my decisions have been a little bit cheaty, but what we've been doing is a relatively traditional programming style, non-specific. Deadlift has been up to 5 working sets. Oh, excuse me. The same thing for bench, and then going into accessories that are probably towards, yeah, this looks like a push-pull split. It's a push-pull split. Push-pull legs, and the last session's a little bit mixed, but the volume we've been working with is very high, very non-specific. Now, I don't want to shift too far away, but what's really obvious is there's areas of that I don't want to lean into. So if we were looking at that squat again, now I've watched that after 4 reps at relative intensity, not at maximal effort, but relative intensity, we're already getting breakdown. So what do I know? Well, I know that I don't want to stick into a rep range where the mechanics of it are already breaking down, because we're just reinforcing poor technique. Now, we're also introducing a pause squat. So within that, I have to make the assumption that anything over 4 working reps, similarly, is difficult to maintain. Where it's difficult to maintain that knee travel, it's difficult to maintain that knee positioning. We're already suffering. So I know I want to do 3 to 4 reps, logically informed. Anything lower, we're not giving enough opportunity. Anything higher, we're forcing breakdown. And so we can also look at, okay, how many sets were we normally doing? We're working at 4 working sets beforehand on one of these days, and we're working at the 4 working sets on the other day. So to achieve a similar volume, we're talking about 4 or 5 working sets. And because I want to give this person the opportunity to do as much change as possible, we're going to go 5. Now that leaves us towards 5 by 4, 20 working reps. And it's very similar, at least within loading, to what they had before. It's bringing it down a little bit, but that's probably a little bit of a safer direction to start with. So 5 by 4 for that day. Now, the other one is that low bar squat. And we know that we're going to have a little bit of difficulty introducing this because it's brand new for that person. So what we're going to do is we're going to split it. We're going to split it between the idea of an introductory set and then a lighter set. So that just means working into feeling out that motion within something that's reasonable, and then forcing that weight to come down even when it was easy. So let's say we've got one top set, and then we're looking at a couple of back off sets. Now we know we've just picked between 5 and 4 sets, so we're going towards that same sort of region. We're going to go with, again, 4 working sets. We can go 3 or 4. Again, these early days, there's room for error. A lot of the choices that would come in the rest of the block are informed by initial technique and initial response, but we're going to go with this to start. So how do we pick the working reps? Well, it's a brand new movement. We can't make the assumption that someone's technique is going to hold up for a long time on something they've just started. It may well do, and we could make changes after the first week. But again, we want a little bit of opportunity, but not too much exposure. So we're looking between 3 and 4 working reps. So I'm going to lean towards 3, safer end. And I'm going to cap that at an RP6. It's the first week. There is no way we're letting that go further than that. So we're going to call it an RP6 cap. Okay. Now for the back off work. Now, again, limitation of technique. So we know that we're going to look for 4 working sets of a similar rep range. So I'm going to call it 4 sets of, what were we looking at? We were working at 3s. I'm going to go 4 or 5s. So I'm going to go, you know what? I'm going to change that to 3 sets of 5. I don't want to, I want that sort of rep range, but, and it gives us an idea of where the breakdown is, because it might be 4 or 5. We get some breakdown and we can make changes in the following week, but I don't want to force that total volume too high, especially so early on with a new movement. Now I know that I want it to be a similar intensity to that top set because it's that same sort of work, but to make sure that it stays a similar RPE, we just need a percentage drop to make sure that it's suitable for the work we've just done. So we have somewhere between 10 and 15% we want to see as a reduction. I'll take that middle step just because we're going 2 additional reps and go for a 12% reduction. That should keep a similar sort of load and a similar sort of intensity. So that's squats done for the low bar work. And the pause squat, again, we're just going to go with an RP6 cap for the first week. A lot of this will do. Okay. So what are we looking at? Now, the progression of that we can talk about afterwards. We need to do the same thing with bench. I don't want to, part of me wants to rocket through this because I know what I want to do already, but I'm trying to be sensible. So we've been doing incline chest press, we've been doing dumbbell chest press, and we've been doing bench work. Now, this is much more specific training, but that means that it will be a drastic change in total load. And so we're going to really cap what we do, especially for one of those middle days. Now, where we've got deadlifts and bench in the same day, on day 2, I'm going to put the bench work first and deadlift work second. Reasoning for that, by the way, is just because the thoracic response, the impact on loading your mid back on conventional tends to have a bit of an impact to your bench work. So I'd rather the bench was in first, and then we can stiffen up on a deadlift afterwards. That's fine. Okay, so I'm just going to lay out the main movements on here. I don't know how long this will run for, but informed decision. So the bench work. We have tempo bench at the end of the week currently. Now it's going to be difficult to make the decision as to where this should go and why, because of the current training. We could say we're making assumptions of where the current best performance has been, which is start of the week, which is why I've put the pause bench there. It's the closest one to the most specific movement that we're after, and the others are going to reinforce technique. So same protocol. At the beginning of the week, we were initially doing 4 working sets of 8, 7, 3, 3. So we're pushing things quite hard. I'm going to look for a bit more polarized training style just to make sure that we're maintaining some of that volume. So actually what we're going to do again is divide those sets. So we're going to go for an initial top set of sorts to kind of set the baseline of the skill, especially in later weeks when we're going to make changes to technique, or we would do. And we're going to have back off working sets. So maintaining the same total sets, 1 top set, 3 back off sets. And then volume wise, now what I've just seen from technique is that, again, there's a bit of a give in those later ranges, but not as substantial. I've not been given very high rep sets. So I'm going to look at the back off works being in the region of 6s. That keeps us close to the volume we were doing, but not quite as high. And then that top set, again, is a skill. I'm going to start us at 3 working reps because I think anything closer, we're going to push a little bit too hard. But because we're going to use these first couple of weeks as introductory, and RP is going to be tricky to gauge, we're going to set that as an RP7. That shouldn't allow for too much breakdown. And then we're going to look for a reduction into the following set. But this time, like I said, the reps are higher and we want to keep that RPE low. So rather than something as small as a 12%, we're going to take a 15% reduction. Okay, now tempo bench, and Spoto to go. Now, Spoto is just about a skill of decelerating the bar. We don't need to push load, and we don't need to worry about there being a top set versus back off set so much. So we're going to keep this one more linear. So with this being a skill to apply for our top sets, and our main work of this block is in a triple, we're going to go for a similar realm. So we're going to go for working, just because it's a new technique, I'm going to stick it to reps of 3, but I want to give a little bit more sets, but not to go too high because we've not been working with this sort of volume of pressing. So we're on 4 working sets of 3 reps. And again, we're going to set an RPE6 cap. Within this first week, I know RP6 seems repetitive, but we need to gauge the skill before we can make any assumptions about load. And we can, if we're an emerging strategies sort of programming style, we can just repeat this and see what the response is like, or we can just take a more linear approach. But this is kind of a DUP sort of principle. We're looking for variance in the style of the days, their priorities, the impact of that power, strength, and so on, and volume. But that will take more of a shape in following blocks once the baseline of technique is there. Okay, so the next thing is the deadlift. Now we have 2 deadlift days, but that priority one is about technique, right? Which is why I've put in the day 2 rather than the day 3, the pause deadlift work. I know that's priority for us. But again, if this is priority, we want to be able to give that like degree of specificity, which is why we often use a top set. And then we could not do this on the first week. We could just go for a movement assessment, but it can be a little bit safer to give that polarized training style. So I'm getting a lot of messages at the same time, but it's again a very new technique. And so I don't want to push the sets and reps too high. So how do we cap that? Well, we can go for a top working set within a brand new skill. I'm only going to take it as 2 or 3 working reps. Otherwise we're going to expect and cause drastic breakdown. So we'll take that for a top double at an RP6, and then we're going to look at the back off work. For the record, there is so much more to be said for a lot of this that I'm kind of skimming over, but I think it's good to give this overview and not completely swamp anyone who decided to listen to this with more information. We can literally talk about why we'd pick a pause off the floor versus pause at the knee, but more often than not, it gives a shorter feedback loop, but it's more responsive to most people in training. Some of that anecdotal, some of that evidence-based. I'm going to calm it with that shit though. Now the back off work, again, working range. I want to give a repetition of skill, but don't want to push it too high. And honestly, just for the first working week, similar working reps and a similar number of working sets, I'm just going to run this as a 3x3. Now, that exact same principle as how do we pick off our reduction, we're going to take a minus 12%, similar intensity, which should be pretty low. And as it's a very similar rep range, there's no need for anything more drastic. The Cohen deadlifts. Now we're just looking at a movement that's going to reinforce the same sort of technique without any substantial breakdown, but achieving a similar amount of total volume. We were already doing 2 types of deadlifts, but very high volume. But I'm going to, because it's new, we'll stick to a similar. We were at 24 working reps. I'd rather start in the region of 15 and give the potential to go to 20. So we're going to run it as a 3x5, and you guessed it, an RPE6. It's the first week. We are not going to push it further than that. I could do set load, and depending on this lifter's response to these sort of things, I could potentially look to give set load if they were unsure, but we have a calculator on here to give an assumption of what that RPE might be, but they're brand new movements. So I'm going to hope they undershoot and that they're being safe. So the last one is tempo bench. I didn't actually do that. Now, what was the reason? Well, we're trying to teach them specific to the doubles and singles that they've sent me how to decelerate the bar and control that. So I'm going to look for something that's either very specific or closer to it for the repetition of skill, or multiple of the same. And I did also say about this changing cadence, right? This 3-1-0 or 3-0-0. So if we want to give them an opportunity to be in that extended range and the pause, we're only going to do 1 working set, and we're going to do somewhere between 1 and 2 working reps. We'll start 2 because there's a chance to reduce it. And then we're going into that slightly kind of cadence, that 3-0-0. We can go for a few more reps because it's going to reinforce that same pattern, but anything higher, we're going to like force the fatigue pretty high. And we can create that same relationship. Now, because this is an easier cadence, we know that that 12% is probably appropriate, but it's our 3rd time benching that week, so I'm going to go for the minus 12%. Okay, so we've actually written the entirety of the main exercises. The ordering could potentially change, but this is the first block and kind of the baseline informed decision. There's actually way more information I could do with, but now what I want to look at very briefly is the additions of accessories. I'm going to talk about it. I'm not going to write it. Now, when someone has, at the moment, a push-pull leg split, what I want to look at is what supports their training. That's my priority choices. Now, what I'm seeing is that in their squat, their leg is they're literally, quite literally, the legs are a weakness, both in the deadlift and in the squat. They're the first thing that's giving out, which is good for the bracing mechanism and so on. But we might look at leg exercises, and then we might also be looking at back exercises to support the changes in the deadlift positioning, because it's like we're going to start with a slightly higher hip height. So it's that prehab versus rehab sort of principle of what can we put in here that just might help sustain positioning and not cause any breakdown. So we're looking to add in leg work maybe on 2 days and back work maybe on 1 or 2 days as well. Anything else can be what is supporting the lifter's enjoyment of their training. So I'm just going to put here. So now, really, where do we want to put that? I'm going to say, so this leg work, we have 3 days. I don't know their schedule well enough, but we only have two exercises on each day so far, except for the third day, which has 3. Now, the third day with 3 movements, a full SBD session. I don't want to make any additions outside of maybe 1 accessory. So I'm going to literally delete columns and leave just 1. This way, I know that I can cap the idea of it and show how much work is being done. Now, we currently have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in a given session. So let's say, without thinking, we're going to cap to 4 accessories possible in a session, but we're on the first week. This is new movements, new amount of time in training. So I've capped that at 4 spaces. Okay. Now, of the accessories they were currently doing, which was barbell overhead press, seated rows, tricep extensions, lateral raises, and similar barbell curls, skull crushers, we don't have anything, and bent over row, and then RD, I'm assuming that means RDL. Or no, rear delt fly, RDF. Okay, so none of these are substantial exercises, and the only additional ones of chest pressing, which was dumbbell chest press, we already have additional bench. So I know I want to maintain just some back work to balance the training with additionals. Now we can go relatively generic. There are 2 things that early on I look at. So we're doing a lot of fixed scapular work. So I tend to lean towards something like a chest supported row. There we go. And something that is like an inverted row, or a underhand lat pull down, or a low row, something that allows scapular gliding. So that's your shoulder blades to go through a full range. They're not fixed, nothing's in the way, and kind of tries to get you to that extended end range. The underhand position for me, I've always found very beneficial. It's subjective to some lifters. So we've got chest supported row on 1, and on the other, I'm going to just add a underhand lat. I'm going to make the assumption, based on the kit that they have, they've not actually said this in here, that they're very restricted. So you know what? I'm going to say underhand barbell row to make that guess that they're probably quite limited. So we've got chest supported row and underhand barbell row. Outside of that, what more do they need? Well, we can make some assumptions afterwards. It's the first week, so I'm going to only give the allowance for 2 more exercises. The tricep work, they've already got copious amounts within their pressing work that they didn't initially have, so I wouldn't add that straight away. The lateral raises is fluff and a bit of fun, so there's no issue there. Again, so we're covering a lot of the ground. Now, the only other thing that I'm aware of with an increased frequency of benching is we tend to have a bicep irritation potential injury. Now, that's not going to happen by any means. What I'm saying is it's something I would want to be preventative of. That's a coffee break. So now there's a staple movement that you might see when I introduce people to new frequencies of benching, and that is an eccentric bicep curl. Now, the reason is that eccentrics are used very often to treat or as a preventative measure. So you'll see this with like Nordic curls, any sort of tendonitis or irritation or damage to the muscle tissue that's being eccentrically loaded that isn't used to that frequency when we're doing so much pressing work, for instance. So an eccentric bicep curl is something that I would program. The underhand barbell row for that free scapular glide, and the chest supported row, again, to reinforce the opposing work for the benching work. And then anything outside of that would be the additional choice of the athlete. Again, I'd cap at just 1 or 2 more spots. So I'm just going to write in the work for the chest supported row. More often than not, in the first week, I'm going to work with 2 working sets for anything, just because I'm not going to add a shit ton of work for anyone. I can make the assumption of 10 to 12 working reps being a range that they can probably maintain. I don't have evidence as to otherwise. Obviously, I did also say that they have been doing bent over rows already at sets of 10. So I'm just going to take that to an underhand 2 by 10. And the other one was the eccentric bicep curl. Now there's evidence based for these, so I'm not going to cheat and say as to whether or not we're making decisions now. This is something that my bias and evidence suggests otherwise. So chess supported row, 2 sets of 10 to 12. We're going to start with RPEs just being a little bit higher than the main work so that they've got somewhere to direct their focus when the sessions have been a bit easier. And we're going to follow an RP7 just to those accessories, except for the eccentric bicep curl, evidence-based decision of keeping it towards an RP8. Now I could set percentages for some of this stuff, but we're going to just go by RPE because it's an easier system for everyone to apply to these movements and kind of see where that's going. And then yeah, there you have it. That was, I don't even know how long I've been talking, but we have gone through and selected a day 1 high bar pause squat, 5 sets of 4 at an RP6, pause bench 1 count 1 by 3 at an RP7, pause bench 1 count 3 sets of 6 at 15% reduction, chest supported row 2 sets of 10 to 12 at an RP6. That's all of day 1 so far. It's only 3 working exercises, but the rest of the decisions would be made with the athlete if there's anything to add. But I also would need to know if there's any leg equipment. In fact, I've just realized I was supposed to add a leg exercise there. And I was saying about difficulty around the knee, which is where we get our decisions about split squats in. So sorry. I'm just going to go with a standard split squat. I'm not going to go for an elevation yet. I need to know more about that athlete. Again, these are decisions that you should be making at the beginning, open baseline that objectively makes a bit more sense. And then when you have more subjective information, we can look for a front foot elevation or a rear foot elevation, or potentially something like a banded split squat to pull to against the knee, to pull it out from the body so that the adductor is working hard to help support that knee valgus that we're working on. But yeah, that would be cheating for me to say already. So, and a split squat. And then day 2 is the Spoto bench, 4 by 3 at 6. The deadlift is paused just off the floor, a double at RP6, and then percentage-based reduction 3 by 3, underhand barbell row, and the eccentric bicep curl. Put the word curl in there, Callum. And then day 3, the final day, we have the low bar squats being introduced, a triple up to RP6. And then the reduction of working reps 3 by 5 at a 12% reduction. And then tempo bench, 1 by 2 RP6 and 3 by 4 at a minus 12%, 2 different cadences there, 3 by 3, 1, 0 and 3, 0, 0. And then a Cohen deadlift for a 3 by 5 linear, nice and simple. And there you have it. That is a way and some decision making based around how we built that program. It's an introductory bit. We can add, we can subtract. And then once we have more information, that's where it is. Now, if anyone is interested, I would be more than happy to review this once they, if they do take this on, if they do their first week, awesome. We can then review and see what decisions we would make on week 2 and potentially week 3. Let me know if that would be of any interest to you. Thank you for listening to this one. I'm going to fill out just some little notes and bits on here for them. If you have any questions, shoot me a message. I hope this was an interesting one and painted an okay picture that you could understand what was going on. If not, I do apologize. I tried my absolute best. I will speak to you beautiful people soon. Have a fantastic day. Peace.